morning, everybody, and welcome to a slightly delayed, apologies, live broadcast and live recording of Life Alchemy. So I'm Rosalind Palmer, and together with my colleagues that you can see here, Emma, Sarah and Chris, we present a podcast called Life Alchemy. So I'm going to do the introduction for Life Alchemy because this will also be edited as a podcast. So welcome to the Life Alchemy podcast, a podcast where four coaches who found themselves having those conversations that maybe are the conversations when the cameras are switched off, and boy, do we know about that, on a lot of issues that, despite the fact that we probably come from different backgrounds, we work in different fields, we were of a mindset where we found the issues we talk about incredibly important to not only our clients, but also to us. And today, prompted by an article I reposted on LinkedIn about Emma Raducanu, the tennis phenomenon, it really concluded that given her multicultural heritage and upbringing, that she is an example of a let me just get this right, a what is it, guys? A geo.
So he talks about having a geocentric mindset, and the article was entitled
The
Illusion of Nations.
Exactly. So we are taking for today, everybody, a geocentric mindset to really be an incredibly cross-border multicultural mindset. So it's really prompted our thoughts and conversations that we'd like to explore today about, where is the world today about that? Is it to do with identity? Have troubled times and the troubled times that we're living through created more divisions, more tribalism, or, really what are the threads we can take from this understanding? So that not particularly well rehearsed introduction aside, I think you'll get the drift, and it's definitely worth staying with us because the conversation always takes some very interesting turns. So who'd really like to pitch in here of my fellow presenters? Who'd like to pitch in first?
I'll go for it. Do you know what? Great. That's what I love about this podcast is that it's just raw and it's just conversation, and it's the conversation that maybe people aren't having. And that's what I love about it. So for me, when I saw Raducanu win, my first thoughts were celebrating human endeavour. And that's where my thoughts go straight away. Oh, this is an amazing accomplishment for such a young athlete. I mean, she's going to have a fantastic career if she keeps on going on every face she will. On the way she's going, we're going to see something amazing. I think the second thing that kicked in, and maybe it's my bias, was when I found out it was a British win, shall we say, I all of a sudden was like, oh my God, I feel really proud of that. And there was a second wave of something different came over. I think when that's the first thing that happens, I think that's when we're in a bit of trouble, because there's this kind of ownership to my tribe, my gang. There's this kind of owning something that's not even yours in the first place, isn't there?
Yeah. But I mean, that's basically what goes on the football terraces every week.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine there's people who work together and then, come Sunday, they're at two ends of the stadium. Yeah. And it's not always necessarily terribly inclusive from what I can see. So, yeah, I think that's a very good point. What do you guys think, Sarah, maybe, or Emma?
I think I love that, Chris, that the fact that, yes, it's celebrating, when Emma won, it's celebrating her human endeavour, and I think that's brilliant. And the second thing that you when you found out that she was British, or grew up and trained in Britain, that there was a sense of pride. And I think so. Just to give everyone a bit of context, in this article that kind of triggered this discussion, the guy, the author, Guido Gianasso, professor of leadership. So his angle is very different from yours, Chris, and I'm very much the same as you. But his angle was very much talking about, her mother's Chinese, her father's Romanian, She was born in Canada, and she grew up in Britain and trained in the UK. And then he went on to say, from an angle that, the Romanians say that she's Romanian and the Chinese say that she's Chinese. But actually, I'd go from a perspective of the same as yours, Chris, where when you found out that she was British, there was a sense of pride there. And I think my angle on it would be very much that, like a sense of pride, and it's not about ownership.
Yeah.
And when I heard, about Emma Raducanu, being half Chinese myself, I felt a huge sense of pride because I think she's like the second female Asian, champion in tennis. And so for me, I was like so proud, and it's not an ownership at all. And I think she's a representation. I think this is where, the author Guido was saying about going to away from national identity to a geocentric mindset, a global thing. I love that. But I think the way he'd there were some things that came really gripe to me in his article, which was where he was trying to celebrate the fact that she's very multicultural, and she represents, different nations. But then he said, she's not Romanian, she's not Chinese, she's not British, she's more than that. And then the words he used to describe are actual really stereotypical identities, where he says she is I've got it here. The reality is that she's not Romanian, Chinese or British. She is much more. She is the outstanding result of the combination of Romanian talent, all Romanians talented. There's no talent in any other national nation. She's a result of the Chinese work ethic. So I can assure you, every Chinese person doesn't have a strong work ethic. And that's and British.
Have you met them all then, Sarah?
Yeah, is every British person open? So that kind of really, I just thought it was such a shame, because there's so much positivity and kind of togetherness that Emma represents. But the way he'd angled it was actually, he'd kind of contradicted himself by actually using those very stereotypical.
Interesting.
I think the interesting thing is, I'm going to go to Hammer next, but I think let's then circle back to this. Clearly you show up bringing your own biases, don't you? Even if they're unpopular. And I think that's the issue. But what did you think, Hammer?
Yeah, I think I was looking at this yesterday and having a conversation. I completely agree that I love the stance of being I've got a value around togetherness and unity. So I really appreciate when people see, more than things are more than the sum of its parts, that kind of thing. But I also do have, the line that Sarah mentioned around, Chinese work ethics or whatever. I do sometimes feel we have to check our own biases, or we have to check, when people are talking, because they really still exist. And
they do.
They really exist. And it troubles me, like I was talking about, the conversation led on to feeling British. And I'm going to be really honest. And I am British. I was born in this country. I don't know, sometimes I feel I need to keep, after Brexit, I felt like I had to go to work. This is a true story. And I told my HR director, I've got a British passport in case you want to see it. And she was like,
no way.
But the idea of being British, I think for me, feels really, it's evolving into something else.
Yeah.
So, and maybe it's a sign of the times. You said, Ros, earlier, that it's very, we live in a world where there are really polarizing views. There are, I'm with you on something, like I'm very open, very, I just don't think that's the society we live in at the moment. And it actually really bothers me. So, we were having this conversation yesterday when I say, maybe 5, 6, 10 years ago, the idea of being British to me meant I live in London. It meant like a multicultural melting pot where actually everybody was accepted. You saw people from all walks of life. And I appreciate I live in London, which is a different melting pot, and not all parts of Britain are like that. But more recently, it's sometimes what you hear and see on the streets today. Being British doesn't always come with positive connotations, I think. And so it makes the conversation around identity for me quite interesting, because how comfortable, even though I was born in this country, what I see as British and what I see represented on TV or in football matches at times, I don't want to associate with that. And so the idea of multiculturalism is important, but I also find it really difficult to identify with any sort of pact. And I've always been like that throughout my university life.
Yeah.
There were people from different backgrounds, and it was interesting. So
yeah,
I'm going with that. I just think it's an interesting time.
Definitely.
Yeah.
it is. And I think, without making this into a 3-hour program, I was having a lot of thoughts this morning whilst doing my lippy and combing my hair and getting ready. So for me, I saw that program, or that snippet of a program with Ashley Banjo and Jim Davidson, where Ashley Banjo went and met Jim Davidson because Jim Davidson had done a little broadcast saying that he thought that the performance by Diversity at I don't know if it was the Royal, whatever they did, it was a Saturday night program, and they did the Take the Knee, very much Black Lives Matter performance, which I saw later. I didn't see it at the time, and I thought it was amazing. And obviously for Ashley Banjo, that really, really mattered. Black Lives Matter was, right at the forefront. And obviously for him, he felt he wanted to make a statement. And at first I thought, well, good on Jim Davidson for at least meeting him. But then, he did himself no service, particularly when he called him George. Yes. A little bit of a mistake. And it just made me think about my own upbringing. I'm a little bit older than you guys. And, I went to a junior school, for example, in quite a nice suburb of Nottingham. And there were 42 in my class. And of that 42, there was one black guy and one Chinese guy and 40 others. And that's the truth. And that was the truth of my upbringing and the reality of my upbringing till I went to a big comprehensive. Then it was much more of a melting pot. And then, of course, I moved to London for 20 years. And then I moved to the Bahamas, where I was a minority. And that was an interesting experience, because whites in the minority, and there's a heck of a lot of prejudice against particularly white Brits because of that ex-colonial past. So I was on the receiving end of a lot of not very nice stuff. So, but it's good in a way, because it took me out of my bubble. So all I'm saying is there was a bubble. And it was like, that was our tribe. This is what being British looks like. I was probably reading Enid Blyton, and my parents were absolutely the most lovely, inclusive people. They were like the social services of their day because they ran a shop and they wouldn't see anybody in need ever. I was taught to, really look out for the underdog, but we probably just didn't know any underdogs who didn't look like us. And so I know, and God rest his soul, my dad was probably one of the most wonderful men I could ever meet. But I'm not sure he would have been happy had I taken somebody home and introduced them as my boyfriend, and they came from a completely different culture or religion even. Because we did tend to live in bubbles. And when I went to the Bahamas, because I had some time on my hand, I thought I'm going to rewrite The Great Gatsby because it's my favorite novel of all time. And The Great Gatsby is really about class, because it's about new money versus old money and established wealth and all those connections versus nouveau, So it's Alan Sugar versus, I don't know, Boris Johnson, probably, who comes from money. Yeah. And I got a load of books on the American class system because I was going to make Gatsby black and Daisy from a different class. And I realized, or what a lot of deep thinkers in America, certainly 20 years ago, 20, maybe 30 years ago, were that it wasn't so much about race a lot of the time as it was about class. And because you had most immigrants, who'd come to a country where they weren't like the other people, they tend to often have to take very low paid jobs. And then, of course, they're aspirational. Their children go to university. You know, I did the PR for Encyclopedia Britannica back in the 90s. And 90% of people who bought those great big whopping sets of entire Encyclopedia Britannicas in the 90s were immigrant families. That's fact. That's a truth, because they were the ones who really wanted their kids to be doctors and lawyers and do really well. So I'm going to stop talking, but I've chucked a lot in there. But I think a lot of it is about just but being in a bubble.
Yeah.
And literally we have been in bubbles, and that's why creating more division, because it's like, who's your bubble? Where are you safe? Who's your tribe? You know, that's drummed into us at the moment. You know, somebody else might be dangerous. And a lot of it, I think, is also about class and mobility. But anyway, I'm going to stop throwing hand grenades in and shut up now. I don't know. What do you think about that, guys?
I was just thinking that, you know, when you were saying about your at school, that was my experience of education, the same. So, you know, I was born in Clapham, and I had my first year of primary school in Clapham, and it's very multicultural. And then we moved to Kent, and which there was like no one to be seen. So it was like complete. I was like, what is this world? You know, like there was exactly the same. Like me and my sister, and I think there's one guy called Vincent who was Chinese in the whole school. There was one Asian girl and like one black girl, and that was the reality. So, and then just the last thing you were talking about bubbles, I think, I don't know, just from my personal perspective, I think growing up as that kind of minority, it's nice now that I can see, like, the only Oriental kind of icon that I had growing up was Bruce Lee. Like, he was the only Chinese person you ever saw on TV. Like,
It's true, yeah. It's true, isn't it?
Yeah, you didn't see any Chinese people in like the newspaper, magazines,
or
like,
adverts,
like absolutely nothing. It was Bruce Lee all the way until very recently, until I would say the last sort of 10 years. And so for me, I can understand, and I think I can understand like bubbles or tribes coming together because there's a need for that and a sense of belonging. But I think, Emma, you said earlier, you know, maybe it's a time where it's just evolving. It doesn't have to be explicitly just tribal. It doesn't have to explicitly be global. It can be just a combination. Like, you know, like you go to different people or different groups or communities, they give you different things.
Yeah.
So I think it doesn't have to be so polarized. I think there's space for all of it.
I'd agree. I think, you know me, I like to keep things really simple. And I always refrain from keeping this one simple because I feel as though I'm going to upset someone. And I think that's in the way. I think this is a brick of silence that's actually in the way. That, you know, we've silenced certain parts of our society that can't say anything because they're not the minority. Well, that's not inclusivity, that's exclusivity. And I think that creeps in. For me, I think we were always going to be in trouble, or we were always going to face what we're facing now, which I think is a really good thing, by the way.
Well, because we're having this conversation for starters, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think we were always going to face this the moment we started splitting off from the human race. From the moment we started to subdivide and call different labels, because that's essentially what it is. We can go right back into history. It's just words and labels, and then we associate our identity to it. We were always going to face this kind of this coming togetherness. And when we're coming together, we're now seeing our differences. I think that's a beautiful thing. But we still got this drive to want to be identified with people who look like us, act like us, sound like us, from some sort of area that we came from, everything from our accents to... And that's where I feel a lot of the problems coincide. But it was dead interesting. I was watching I read an article the other day from one of the BBC presenters, or one of the presenters in sport, who was right behind the Black Lives Matter. She's a black presenter. And actually, when she's gone digging into her own past, she's found out that actually her family were part of the slave trade.
Oh, I saw that. It was on Who Do You Think You Are?
Amazing. But it was interesting. What happened after that was kind of that feeling of shame and that kind of quelling down of, oh, I don't know whether I should be part of this fight now. There was a real questionable part of it. And I think that's the bit that needs to be ditched, is that wasn't her decision. It's got nothing to do with her. But she's identified because there's some bloodline that was part of it, and now there's shame, and shame's getting in the way. I need to eradicate it and be able to, like, just talk about it. You know, if I come out with something racist and I don't mean it, I would love someone to just help me understand how racist it was. Luckily, I've never come across that, but if I did, I'd like to think that the people around us go, hey, Chris, just going to sit you down for a minute. I just want to explain this. Not, oi, stand them up against the wall, let's throw stones, because that's not being inclusive, that's being exclusive again.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a long way to go on all parties. I don't think there's just one needs to shift. I think there's lots of party mentality and mindset, and that's where I feel as though the geocentric mindset really fits with where life's moving at the moment. Is because it's a sense of wonder about how people can bring their skills, their cultural backgrounds alive now. It's great.
I think there's something really powerful in what you said, Chris, about, for me, it's about individuality. So like respecting everybody else's differences, but like really celebrating your own individuality and other people's, because every single person is completely unique, you know, and I think there's so much power in that. And there's so much stuff that you've all said that, like, I don't know where to go with the thoughts in my head. There's so much. So like it's about, you know, shame. I think there is something, you know, that's blocking the conversation. It was around the time of the George Floyd murder, and I had quite a few conversations, and also quite heated conversations with people. I wrote an article and the essence of my article was, you know, like, Black Lives Matter, we need to understand it, we need to empathise with it, and not try to rebuff it. There's something in it. Let's try and check our own understanding and biases. Anyway, when I posted that, it was surprising. I post a lot of crap on LinkedIn and it gets loads of likes and loads of comments about businessy things. I wrote something which I thought was, to me, a really important topic, and it was like tumbleweed, which told me a lot, you know. It's really, people don't feel comfortable. I actually had somebody said, well, I don't like what you've written, I'm really angry with you, which then turned into a very long, continued debate between the two of us where we had different opposing views. But anyway, some of that, one of the things it made me think about, and I think I put it in the article, which was about uncoupling sort of shame and like privilege, and actually,
yes,
you know, it's really important to do that.
As Chris said, it's going to stop you from actually exploring or being open or changing your view. You're gonna batten down the hatches, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, what both Rose and you, Sarah, were saying earlier, like, I grew up in Kent. I grew up not too far from Sarah, actually, and I went to a school that was predominantly white, and I was never made to feel any different, you know. So I grew up in a bubble where there was maybe a couple of other black girls, a couple of other Asian people, and that was it. So, but I never, you know, it was the norm. It was only when I left Kent and I went to university, I had a culture shock. So I went to a university in West London, and they were almost like, I would call it tribes of people that either were Sikh, by religion, Sikh or Muslim or Hindu or Indian versus Pakistani. And I couldn't really get my head around it because, you know, like, I could not understand why somebody would ask me what my religion was before asking me my name. And it was really weird to me. Anyway, this whole thing of like understanding your identity, where you feel you fit in or don't fit in, I think the idea of privilege is also really important. You know, like, we all have privilege. It doesn't matter whether you are, you know, of a ethnic minority, whether you're female or male. It's not just white male privilege that exists. Everybody, I think, has privilege to different degrees. And, you know, the recent times made me even understand my own. Yeah. I was brought up with this mentality, like, if you work hard, you'll achieve. And so I sort of believe, well, if everybody works hard, they'll achieve. It only took me recently, you know, in recent years, to realise that's not the case for everybody. I had to really unwind some of my own limiting beliefs around fairness and equality, and then recognise my own part to play in, like, the privilege that I have got, how do I use that for better? You know, like how do I use that to elevate other people?
Yeah.
It's really important to me. But what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is I think it's such a complex topic. It's important that we don't shy away from it, but it's also really important to like be curious and like be open ourselves to question our own thinking, our own beliefs, because you know what we've held so firmly and felt we were doing the right thing. Sometimes some of that for me was completely squashed. I don't pick all of it.
Yeah,
really,
definitely.
And it's not an easy thing to do, but it's a powerful thing to do when you get through it or you work towards it.
I'd agree. I think there was a phrase said not so long ago that really resonated with me, and it really fits now. That tradition is something handed down by dead people. You know, they're not here. They're not here. They've handed it down. That's really good, isn't it? Because actually it fits with where we're at now, because we've been handed this thing and people are keeping these traditions going because their grandparents did. And
they keep hatreds going.
Yeah.
You know, because we're that and you're that, and my dad was that and my granddad was that, and
there's not many. You don't have to travel far. You can travel quite close to a border where people will hate you for being English. And I've experienced that on the team.
And you know, when I went to London, and you know, look, I'm not trying to pitch my card in here of going, oh, poor me, but you know, I speak quite well because I had elocution lessons, okay, and I think it's why I did well in London in the 80s. Because I came from Nottingham, you know, and people occasionally would go, oh, say Bath again, and I'd go Bath, and they'd go, oh, you're northern, aren't you? You know, they'd be like, we've tumbled you. You can't say grass and you can't say Bath. Got you. You know, like I was doing really well at pretending I was a human being up to that point, you know. And, you know, I went into a world of massive, you know, southern privilege, and you know, and again, I'm not saying all people in the south were rich, but you know, the girls where I first worked in PR, you know, had all gone to Rodine and really posh public schools, and would say things like, it's lovely getting our wages because I've got spending money for the weekend, and I'd say things like, I have to live on mine for a month, and they'd go, oh, how lovely, you know, like you poor northern person, how weird are you? You know, so there's always been different types of prejudice, haven't there?
Definitely. But I think now's the time to challenge it. Now's the time that we can challenge it. And I think the digital space has opened that up. I think it's just accelerated it. Is the fact that we're able to connect on different levels and very, very quickly as well. You know, an opinion gets put out there and then 55,000 opinions just follow it. It's incredible. And you can see these debates go viral, and then obviously they quell down. The next one comes up. They're happening faster and faster now. And I think that's accelerating the whole process as well, definitely.
I think that's what's happening. I think you're tending to find tribes, because we are fundamentally tribal people, and we are wired for that, okay? Yeah. But I think the unlearning we need to do is that it doesn't have to be a tribe who looks like us or just grew up where we grew up. It's probably more a tribe that shares our values or our aspirations, or you know, for me, that they're the tribes I want to hang out with.
Yeah.
There's a song that's got a line in it. I can't remember where it's from. I want to say like Sting or The Police or something like that. And it's along the lines of, if only the Russians loved their children too.
It is a Sting song, I think.
Is it a Sting song? Yeah. And it was wonderful. Someone created an article off the back of it based around just understanding that people look different, sound different, are different from different backgrounds. But actually, when we really get down to it, they've got the same values, the same morals. They want the best for their family. They want the best for themselves. Just understanding that.
Oh, yeah. And when I was head of marketing for the leprosy mission, and I'd be in India, and I'd be with people with leprosy who are below the untouchables. Oh, wow. So people wouldn't even let them go on buses or go near them. And they'd be living in an underpass in like Mumbai in a tarpaulin, and all they owned was a cup. I've stood with those people. I've met those people. But you're right. When you talk to them through an interpreter, you go, what do you want? And they'll look down at their child. I mean, it makes me want to cry. And they'll go, I want my child to be happy. I want my child to have a job or to have a house. That's their aspiration. But there is always, I've been in Africa in villages literally with mud huts, and it's the same. And you're right, everybody wants the best for their child.
I think I think it's the same always. The problem always comes down to labels, right? So it always comes up, doesn't it? And I think that's why I felt so annoyed in that article when that guy, when he was using these stereotypes, because what happens then is that creates these perceptions, that creates these silos, and that creates a lot of shame. Because if you're Chinese and you don't have a strong work ethic, or if you're Romanian, you're not very talented, like whatever it is, like you but the thing is, if that, you can feel like a failure. And then I know those are people who grow up, myself included, and I have lots of clients who go through the same, where they have lots of identity crises, and they're like, do you know what? I don't know. Like, I spent most of my life in Britain, but actually I'm Italian. But then I grew up in Italy, but actually my mom's from Brazil. I don't know where I fit, or should I be more, and then, people go through and they're kind of looking back at their roots, which I actually find really interesting. I think that's an important part of our history and everything as well. But I think it's those stereotypes that we need to just, like you say, Ros, look at people and their values. But I think it's not about forgetting about those differences or those different cultures. I think it's about celebrating all that richness. And so no stereotypes, because it just creates shame, because it creates feel like a failure. It doesn't help whatsoever. And I love that, Chris, tradition is handed down by dead people. But it's so true. It
is,
so true.
It serves no purpose whatsoever. We can just sort of see and celebrate each other as we are, and celebrate that richness of the cultural influences that we all have. And it doesn't have to divide, and it doesn't have to be wrong or right. And just, I
agree. I think that a lot of the argument and a lot of the discussions lean towards that kind of polarization of, like, is it genetics, is it nature or nurture? We get that a lot in sport, but it always comes down to talent doesn't go anywhere unless it's nurtured. It needs to be nurtured. It can't just turn up and show up and then win medals now. That's just unheard of. It might do it in a shorter period of time than someone else, and that's where their genetics comes in. But it's always around being nurtured, and that's where that ownership of the medals come from, and that's where countries put their flags to it and they go, we nurtured that. We nurtured that. We took them in from the age of 4. We nurtured that. And there's a huge sense of pride around that. But for me, I think that if we keep on focusing on the nurturing side, I think that's a really positive thing, because if you think about where things are going in this country right here, right now, is we're asking these questions. Yes, they're really uncomfortable for many people. Good, because discomfort is bloody good for that kind of shift. But I think the thing that I feel really proud of is we're asking this. We're ahead of many, many other nations. Like, I was lucky enough to travel the world over the last 20 years. And you don't have to go very far to find very closed mindsets within cultures, very, very closed off to lots and lots of other different cultures. I feel as though within the UK now, I feel as though there is a shift happening. There is a movement. There's a curiosity building.
I think there is, definitely.
And I feel it. And I'm really proud to be part of it. And it's got nothing to do with nationality or flag. Just proud to be part of the debate and proud to be part of the new wave of conversations coming in.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because they're in all countries, in all communities, there will be people with like an open mindset that are willing to tolerate stuff that they don't like, or just accept without having to feel they need to violently agree, disagree, or assert themselves over and above somebody else. And again, in all communities, countries, there will be people with very closed mindsets. So I think it's really important that we recognise that, because I'm conscious that in this country, like even in this podcast, at the start, I talked about feeling, seeing some of that, how Britishness for me sometimes represented something which I don't always like, but that's not a sweeping statement, just, generally.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, you've both said something interesting. You know, it's about celebrating difference. Like Sarah, you said that, and Chris, it's about nurturing. And I think there is something, for me, I think there is something very simple that we can do to start like shifting the dial. And I think there's two things. There's one around asking questions, because how do we ask questions really openly about understanding somebody else's experience, or, you know, their lived experience, and what it means, you know, what stuff means for them, how it feels for them. You know, just asking a question gives you information and insight, which is powerful. And we can all do that. We've all been, you know, it's the first thing you do as a child. You learn to ask questions because you don't know anything. I think we should just go back to doing that, quite frankly. And then secondly, I think using your body as a bit of a signal, you know, like we will all have an experience where someone says something, and it, like Sarah said earlier, she read the article and it really griped.
Yeah, if it feels off, it's off.
It feels off. But actually sitting with that feeling and thinking, okay, well, what is it that's what's bothering me? Is it because I have a connotation that this means danger, or whatever it is? Do you know what I mean? So I think when you notice that feeling of discomfort, sit with it and explore it. And then secondly, ask the questions, you know, ask them in an open way. What, why, how, you know, tell me more. And I wonder what shift that would start creating if we did that all a little bit more.
I'd agree with that. I think a lot of people wouldn't do that because it looks on the outside like they're frightened of change. But actually on the inside, I think they're frightened of uncertainty. I think that's what drives a lot of people's kind of stagnation.
Totally.
I think
it's a fundamental human need.
Yeah. They want things to stay the same.
I think if we understand we are in very divisive, uncertain times where there is a fear narrative going on, okay? I'm just going to say that. But, you know, go look at a newsstand today and literally cast your eye across it, and there is a massive fear narrative.
Big time.
Fear will make people more tribal. It will make people cling to certainty more. But also part of what's going on is shifting the paradigm. Part of what's going on is breaking down what we think we know.
Yeah.
And so you're right. Everybody's saying gems of it here. It's time to unlearn. It's time to embrace the discomfort and actually see that as a passageway to something better, to something greater, to a new form of connection, about values, about nurturing. And I think if that's what's come out of half an hour conversation here, that gives me great hope for the future.
Definitely. What a way to end.
Maybe we should end there rather than, because I think it's been quite a deep conversation. And I think we will have more conversations, don't you guys, about unlearning and about some of those things we are unlearning or we're feeling off about and we're questioning. And if we're turning up and feeling it, we know that our clients and probably lots of people listening are as well. So we will stumble our way through being your guides. Any last thoughts? I'm going to go round as I can see the screen. So Emma, any last thoughts?
Last thoughts? No. No, there aren't. I just think just continue to be curious, you know, whether it's with yourself and how you're feeling, or just with the world around you, because like you can never stop learning something new. I truly believe that about yourself and about others.
Chris?
I love that. Yeah, so for me, there's a couple of things came out that kind of nurture versus nature thing. You know, I think in any given mindset, there is a focus on, are we nurturing the right values in the right way in the right time? And then just identifying with a sense of belonging. Do we need to? Need to? Or is that just, I know we say that's kind of pre-designed in our history, but have we just learned it for such a long time that it's become a habit? Do we need it now?
And part of it is the stories we keep telling ourselves. You know, when you were saying about that nurture nature, I thought about an Irish friend who I used to share a flat with in the 80s. and she would literally eat meat and potatoes every day, and she'd go, "Oh, that's the Irish." and even then, I used to think, "Oh, is that genetic?" You know, like, no, you know, like you. And Sarah.
I've loved this conversation. I think definitely revisit your values, sort of, and celebrate your individuality. You don't have to fit in a box. Like, you can just be your own unique self. And if everyone did that and they was really true to themselves, I'm sure the world would be a much happier place. And that's bad.
I love your top, by the way. It looks like you've got a sash. So I'm going to, you know, a sash saying, I'm a winning individual. I love it. So you've been listening and watching Life Alchemy, our podcast. We record pretty much every other week. Just because we're super busy. It's not because we don't have a lot to talk about. So sometimes it's every week, but usually it's every other week. And you can find us on all major podcast platforms. So I'm Rosalind Palmer, and thanks for tuning in if you're watching this on repeat. And thanks for listening to the podcast. And more off-script conversations will be coming your way soon.